Hi, I'm Pastor Nanette Christofferson, and along with Pastor Steve Talmadge, we offer these short Bible studies on our lectionary readings. This week, we are in Lectionary Year B, Lent 2, and our Gospel reading comes from Mark chapter 8, 31 to 38. This is a pretty popular passage. We hear it, in 3 of the Synoptic Gospels as Jesus and his disciples are on their way to Caesarea Philippi. Jesus has just had the feeding of the 4,000. He has healed a blind man, and he has also run into some trouble with the Pharisees as well. So this reading here is an important reading in the Gospel of Mark because it signifies a turning point. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, others say you're Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus sternly ordered him and them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Jesus called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." As we take a look at this reading, context is important. On the map here, you can see where Caesarea Philippi is. You can see the Sea of Galilee or the Lake of Galilee there, and you can see it's not all that far from Caesarea Philippi. It is north, and it's located in an important area too, a big trading area of roads and highways. So as we take a look at this, we can see that we're almost exactly at the midpoint of Mark's gospel. This passage initiates a major shift in Mark's plot. The word Christ has not appeared since the gospel's opening verse. We have had 7+ chapters of Jesus' ministry, questions asked about his true identity and authority, secrets told and disclosure promised, and demonic powers identifying Jesus as God's Son. Readers have been given no identification that death awaits Jesus. Suddenly, Jesus is near Caesarea Philippi, a very Roman setting and once the limit of ancient Israel's northward extension. Here, Jesus pops the question, "Who do people say that I am?" Now he wants to discuss his reputation here at the borderland. When the people offer John, Elijah, or one of the prophets as responses to Jesus' question, they give sensible answers. Much of Jesus' ministry clearly evoked these figures' legacy through his calls to repentance, healings, and meals served in the wilderness. Yet Peter's claim, "You are the Christ," makes an astounding statement. So far, Jesus hasn't done anything that looks particularly Christ-like. The few intertestamental Jewish texts that mention the Christ paint a very different picture. This means Peter's comment is anticipatory. Peter cannot be saying, "The stuff you're doing, Jesus, reminds me of those obscure references we find in some writings about a uniquely anointed, that is, divinely authorized deliverer." No. By calling Jesus the Christ at this point in the story, Peter declares, "I think you're the one who will purify our society, reestablish Israel's supremacy among the nations, and usher in a new era of peace and holiness. I'm expecting big things from you." Peter rebukes Jesus. No wonder Peter lays into Jesus in verse 32. Suffering? Rejection? Killed? Wasn't Jesus paying attention when Peter said he was the Christ? Everything Jesus describes in verse 31 would appear to disqualify him from being that person. Good thing Peter is there to straighten him out and show him the path the Christ is supposed to follow. Peter gets the title right, but the meaning wrong. His confession uses technically accurate language, but he cannot yet see what this language entails. Not only does Jesus' identity include his eventual death and resurrection, it will finally be defined by those things. And so Jesus, like the gospel author, embarks on a project of recasting who the Christ is and what he will do. Jesus won't wield power over others. Instead, powerful and cynical people will have their way with him. If anyone wants to become my followers, it is precisely at this point as Jesus speaks about his fate, when he starts making public statements and following him. In verse 34, he addresses the crowd with his disciples, and he invites any who want to follow him. Whispered discussions about Jesus' identities result in an open invitation to participate. Mark's Jesus isn't so much about gathering pupils or making sure everyone understands him. He calls followers. Want to see who he really is? Join him. It is crucial to view Jesus' invitation in connection with what he has just revealed about himself. The imperatives, let them deny themselves, and let them take up their cross, risk becoming trite aphorisms if we forget they are about following this guy, the one who has just described his fate. It's really easy when people talk about picking up their cross and following Jesus, or this is my cross to bear. Well, Jesus, when he asks us to pick up the cross, he's asking us to deny themselves and to take on a new life. So I think that oftentimes people misunderstand what it means to take up your cross and follow Jesus. Self-denial is not primarily about squashing our desires or delaying gratification. Jesus calls us to separate ourselves from what defines us. A person in Jesus' culture was defined by those to whom he belonged, usually household or kin. Jesus calls people to embrace new understandings of identity. Disciples join a community defined by association with Jesus, who himself denies conventional understanding of who he must be. We can see Mark 3:31-35. They enter a new family comprising all of Jesus' followers. Self-denial is not self-annihilation, but complete redefinition. Self-denial does not mean seeking or embracing abuse for its own sake, as its suffering itself is a redemptive or mark of virtue. The kind of suffering Jesus acknowledges as a reality in this passage is a particular kind, persecution resulting from following him. Self-denial and redefinition come with their risks. This should not be confused with justifying abuse or abusive relationships. We are to be cross-bearers. Likewise, cross-bearing means much more than patience or obedience. It means death. It means the resignation of one's reputation and life. Crosses imply rejection. Those who bore crosses in the Roman imperial world were publicly declaring that their society or their leaders had denied them. Those who follow Jesus, associating with this vividly rejected Christ, takes on an identity and a way of living that pose threats to the world's corrosive ideologies and idolatries. So how do we live this out? What does this look like? What does it mean to follow him? So what does it look like or mean to follow Jesus, to truly participate in the kingdom he proclaims and the work to which he calls us? It means to expect the same consequences he faced in life and death. Mark's view of discipleship is hardly rosy. Presumably, Mark's original readers understood the costs much better than you and I. Mark's view on Jesus and his followers also refuses to promise full clarity. Peter's confusion about Jesus' fate and authority reminds us of how difficult, how weird it is to embrace a suffering Christ. We would rather define Jesus according to our own priorities. Following Jesus, with its self-denial and cross-bearing, becomes a lived, enfleshed means of orienting us to who Jesus is and how he becomes known. So let's have a few ending thoughts here. Mark 8:34-38 offers an extremely difficult description of what we call Christian discipleship. Mark's gospel seems aware of this. Remember, this book concludes with no one still following Jesus, at least in a literal sense. Everyone has fled him by then. But Jesus never denies his followers, even the would-be ones who are bedeviled by so many distractions and competing commitments. What I've read here is mostly written by Matt Skinner. He was one of my professors in seminary. And one of the things that I appreciate about Dr. Skinner is that he asks a lot of great questions. And this is a passage that is a turning point. We heard the Transfiguration a couple of weeks ago, and that's the exact turning point in the Gospel of Mark. But as we look to this passage we have before us, what does it mean to be a cross bearer? And oftentimes we look at the things we have, like the cards we've been dealt with in life, that's our cross to bear. But Jesus is asking for us something much deeper than that. He's saying, I will be with you in those difficult times. And he's also telling us that to bear his cross means, as followers of Christ, there is death to self. And this is a very difficult thing to try to live out as well. Death to self means that we are always thinking of others. As we bear that cross, we are thinking of other people, not just ourselves. And so as we look to this reading, and Christ, this reading we'll hear again this summer, because it's such an important reading, and we'll also have Jesus explain to his disciples 2 more times what it means to be a follower of him and what it will look like for him in the end. And as we heard on Ash Wednesday, denial is usually far easier to live into than the reality of what might be happening. So I hope you have some time this week to think about what it means to follow Christ, and what does that look like for us in our lives today and as part of Christian discipleship. Have a blessed week on your Lenten journey, and I look forward to seeing you all in church.